and a little bit more about our tracking requirements, our documentation requirements, so that it will hopefully help give you a little bit more appreciation for all the hard work that our counselors do. That's a lot of times behind the scenes, because we're referring out to our partners within the community for the direct services, but there's a lot of other things that happen that you guys don't always get to see. So that's the purpose of this training today, is to talk a little bit more about those pieces. April, I'll just say next when we're ready to move on, if that works for you. Thank you. So this is your overview. We have like one slide of overview. So vocational rehab is a service that's provided throughout the entire country. Every state has a VR program that is required to follow federal laws and rules, and they're all a little bit different, because while we have federal laws and rules that we follow, those federal laws and rules are interpreted at the state level. So at the state level, they create their own laws and rules that then trickle down to our policies and procedures. So every state does look a little bit different from VR, but whether you're in Ohio or in Hawaii, you should still see a VR program in some fashion that is providing services to individuals with disabilities and helping them to obtain competitive integrated employment. Our services start at the age of 14, and there is no age cap. So someone could be 86 and looking for employment, and we would still support them in that endeavor. And we have had individuals in their 80s and 90s on our caseloads across the state who just really want to continue working. So 14 is the earliest that we can start working with an individual. Typically those students are being referred from school districts across the state, but those referrals can come from anywhere, and we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. So our goal is really to help an individual with disabilities prepare for work, finding work, and maintaining that employment. We're not a staffing agency. There's been this back and forth in the last couple of years about, do we have this bank of jobs that we can help people just kind of slide into, or do we not have a bank of jobs? We do at this point have something called urgent jobs, which is, or it was before COVID, called Jobs Now, which is a bank of jobs with employer partners that we work with across the state, that's maintained by one of our divisions, Employment Innovation Services, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. But it's not really a bank of jobs in the idea that we just slide someone into those jobs. Our responsibility to the folks that we're working with is to help them with understanding how to get those jobs independently, because the goal would be, when they look for employment in the future, they don't need to come back to OOD for that support. We should be giving them the tools to be able to successfully obtain and maintain employment in their future as well. So even though we do have jobs available on a list, we're not just placing them. We really want them to be a part of that decision and the effort to get the employment. So just wanted to mention that to you guys. We're going to talk about funding in a minute, so we can move past that. So if you want to move on to the next slide, April. So, sorry, I'm going to take a drink of water. So OOD has a couple of different departments, bureaus within it. So I wanted to explain that to you guys a little bit. We have some confusion from when we had our name change in 2013, which was right when I started with OOD. So I was also very confused. But basically what changed for OOD is we were a Rehab Services Commission, which was confusing for the people that we served and some of our partners across the state. They often thought that we were linked with rehab and corrections. So there was a change in our name to Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, which is the main agency that we fall under. But Elisa and I both work in the Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation, which is one of the bureaus or divisions within OOD. There are other divisions and bureaus within OOD. So sometimes people say, oh, you used to be BVR, but you're OOD now. So just to help clarify, we still are BVR. We're BVR within OOD. So Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation is obviously employment services for individuals with disabilities. BSVI is also employment services for individuals with disabilities. but is specifically for those with visual impairments. When you're making a referral to OOD, really that's up to our counselors and our caseload assistants to determine, do they go on that BSBI track or do they go on that BVR track? So that's not something that you guys really have to worry about. It has to do more with disability category, which is something we're also going to talk about today. But just so you know, those two different programs within OOD do exist. Go ahead, April. So we have a couple other divisions within our agency that we wanted to mention because sometimes individuals don't know that we do other things. So OOD is also responsible for the Division of Disability Determination, which is all of the determinations for Social Security for the state of Ohio happen within our agency. We have a building off of Campus View that's really close to our VR building, and we have over 300 staff that work there that specifically focus on determining Social Security determinations for the state. So sometimes we have some crossover between the two divisions. They may be referring to people for VR who don't qualify for Social Security. We may be helping to guide people in that direction for determinations for Social Security if we feel like folks might benefit from that kind of service. But for the most part, we are different divisions and we don't really interact a whole lot, but we do fall under that OOD umbrella. That isn't something that's consistent across states. Some states do have disability determinations within their agency, but it's not necessarily the same for every state and for VR services. The other department that we have within our agency is Employment Innovation Services. So some of you may have worked with Kelly Jordan or Kristen Berry. And basically what their job is to help engage employers to make sure that we're meeting the demands of the business community, because we have to do that, right? We're helping people get hired into those divisions. So they will reach out to employers, they help build partnerships. We have a list of employer partners that helps to feed into those urgent job lists that I was talking about. And we also do something called windmills training, which is a training for employers on EEO. So it's really helpful to have them on our team. So it's not directly in VR, but it is under that OOD umbrella. Go ahead, April. Thank you. So funding. So we have funding that comes from a couple of different places. This was 2019 data. So in 2019, 78.7% of our funding was federal dollars, and that equated to about $99.5 million for the state. The state match to our federal dollars in 2019 was 21.3%, which was about $27 million. So most of our funding does come from federal dollars, but we obviously get a state match based on what we're spending at the federal level. And so because of that, we are very accountable to the federal government. So we have to be accountable to the Rehab Services Administration, which is our overarching federal agency. And most of what we do and what we're required to report is based out of WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. So there are several things within WIOA that affect, I know, DD as well. But a lot of what is in there that affects us directly affects our funding and our reporting. So I wanted to make sure to point that out to you guys. We do have a required 15% set aside for transition services based off of our federal dollars. So we are required for our dollars to go to 15% of our dollars to go to individuals that are age 14 to 22. So we have a huge focus on transition students and making sure that we're meeting their needs and getting that early intervention. Sorry, I'm really nervous. I don't know why. I know most of you guys, but I feel very nervous. Can you go back for just a second, April?
You're doing a great job, Amanda.
Thank you. I don't know what, I think it's like, because I'm staring at the screen, but I can see all your little faces lined up over here or something. So plus I want to make sure that I'm giving you accurate information. So this triennial statewide needs assessment, I don't know if you can click on the hyperlink in the presentation, April, and it will still allow you to share your screen or not. If not, you all have it in the chat and that's okay. But we are required to do a statewide needs assessment every 3 years. And man, is it an undertaking. It collects a lot of information across the state to figure out what populations are we serving, what populations are we not serving, is there a gap in services, are there a gap in dollars being spent, so that we can make sure, thank you, and I didn't need you to really show anything specific, I just thought I would show you that when you go to the link, there's all of these hyperlinks that you can go to look at the different pieces, to figure out, where are we helping people get jobs? Are we helping certain populations of people get jobs in certain categories, making certain wages? It really breaks everything down. I have not read the whole thing, I will be very honest, because it would be a huge undertaking to read. But there is a lot of good information that we then use at our central office level to help make decisions for the field and how we're going to move forward with services for individuals. So if you guys are interested, we have that link available to you so you can take a look at it at a later time. But that really helps to outline a lot of what we're doing every 3 years when it's reevaluated. Okay, this is a lot of words and I don't expect you guys to read it all. But basically, Elisa and I wanted you to have a little bit better picture of all of the things that we're responsible for and that we're bound by. So like I said earlier, we have the Rehab Services Administration, which is our federal agency under the Department of Education that we're required to report to based on those WIOA metrics that are presented by the federal government. And then as a state, we're governed by the ORC and the Ohio Administrative Code. So we have a lot of policies and procedures that come directly from code, which are law. So as a state employee, we are required to follow the law. So when we look at policy and procedure, you know, most of the time that's where those things are coming from. All of our policies and the procedures are available to the public. So yeah, if you click on that link, we just wanted to show you where they were in case you have questions or you have participants that you're working with who have questions as to why we might be giving them certain direction. I see Leslie. Hi, Leslie. There we go. So if you go to the search, you can obviously search in anything. Like if you search transportation, it'll show up. Yeah, you have to spell it correctly, April. It'll show up and there's our transportation policy. So they are alphabetized, but you know, everything is listed there from pre-employment transition services to transportation to how do we determine eligibility, what are our time frames for doing certain things. So everything is outlined, and you can see this is just on transportation and it is 13 pages. So you know, these counselors are really working hard to make sure that they're following all of these things and meeting the requirements for each policy whenever they're making a decision in the case. Part of what we're responsible for as well, based on federal rule, is that anytime we make a decision in the case, we have to provide someone their appeal rights in case they don't agree with that decision. So a lot of those are available within our forms that we're already providing to individuals, but sometimes the counselors provide that independently. So we do have an appeals process, and again, that's kind of why it's so important that we're following policy and procedure as we move through cases, because if we don't and we get an appeal that doesn't meet policy and procedure, then that wouldn't go well for us. So I just wanted to give you an example there of what it is that we're looking at. All of our policies and procedures, like I said, fit into OAC, and they fit into the requirements from federal code through the Rehab Services Administration. But they are reviewed regularly. We have a 2-year review process where every 2 years a policy is reviewed, and it's on a moving cycle. So when those come up for review, when they get to the point of going to public comment, they do go out through our Granicus emails for, which is like if you go to our ood.ohio.gov and sign up for our emails, they will go out through there saying, hey, this policy is up for review and it's up for public comment. So you as a stakeholder could always take an opportunity to review it and put a public comment on it if there's something that maybe is confusing or doesn't make sense, or you're like, why the heck are you doing this way? And then if they can evaluate it, they will. If it's specific to law, obviously they may not be able to. Okay. This is like super invigorating at 2:30 on a Friday, right? Talking about policy and law and fun stuff. So this is a little bit more familiar to you guys probably about vocational rehab process. And we wanted to go through each of these things, but maybe in a different way than what you've seen them before, just to try to give you a little bit more of an in-depth picture as to what the counselors are doing when they're each step of these in each step of the process. So application for services, we'll start there. If you want to go to the next slide. So referrals can really be completed in any way. There's a whole list there. That OODworks.com is our online portal where individuals can self-refer, or you as the county board could also help to refer through the portal if you're not connected directly with one of our counselors to make those referrals. So, you know, I don't know if you guys have used that or not. It's a really simple tool. It allows an opportunity for the individual to put their own information in and why they feel like they need our supports. And then it actually creates a profile that goes directly into our case management system so that it will get assigned to one of our staff automatically and they will be reaching out. So it's a nice tool to have. But like I said, 14 and up is appropriate for referrals. No, I guess another note at the bottom there. Oh, thank you. So if you scroll down, well, at the top, it has a bar that kind of goes through what to expect, how it might impact benefits. Take the assessment is like kind of a pre-application questionnaire of, do you want to participate in this? And then when you go down, you scroll down, you can actually follow the steps to create your profile and apply for services with us. So they do have to create an account, so you have to have an email address. So if you are assisting someone with applying through OOD Works, they would need to make sure that they have an email address, or that you're using an email address that then could be accessed later. If they are not their own legal guardian, then obviously we need to make sure that we have signatures from legal guardian. We cannot consider someone an applicant for OOD services until the application is complete, including all demographic information, social security number, and individual and, if applicable, guardian signature. And then our counselor needs to meet with the individual for an intake and sign off on the application, and that's when they're actually considered an applicant for services. So if we don't meet all of those pieces, they're technically a referral at that point. Does anyone have any questions so far? I guess I should have stopped before we got to the point of talking about case progression.
I don't see any questions in the chat yet, so.
It was that good of an explanation.
Am I bouncing in and out too much for anybody? Just wanted to make sure we're including your links and websites and all that.
Thank you. Okay. So Elisa, I'm going to turn it over to you. She is going to talk through the rest of the case progression, and then we have a couple other things at the end that I'm going to go through. So Elisa.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
And I sound normal?
Yes, you do.
Okay, good. All right, so once we get the application and we meet all of those criteria that Amanda explained to be considered an applicant, then we start the process of eligibility and order selection. So for the eligibility, we are required to document disabilities, functional limitations. We do that in several different ways with different documents. So these are some of the documents that we require for eligibility. We can use these to determine functional limitations as well. So the ETR, the IEP from the schools, the any medical records, whether they are school related or board related, we can use those. And then of course we can use the records from the board, the Fed form, OED, COED, ISP, those types of things. The order of selection just talks about is more of when this individual will be ready for services. And it's not something we're doing right now because that's based on our wait list. And right now we do not have a wait list for services. So you can go on to the next slide. So with the eligibility, we do have 4 criteria to determine someone eligible. So number 1, they have to have that diagnosis, and it has to be by a qualified personnel. So with some of the ETRs, the school psychologist will do testing and come up with what they're eligible for based on what the school's testing was. Some school psychologists are qualified and they have those documentations behind them. Others are not. It just depends on the different school psychologists. We can also use the Fed form to determine if it a diagnosis. So number 2 is those functional limitations. We have 7 different functional limitations that we look for. And we use all of that documentation that we can get to pull out the information about an individual's functional limitations, what they struggle with, what they're good at, all those things. To determine that one, criterion 3 is if an individual can benefit from services. What's the likelihood that they will have an employment outcome based on VR services? And number 4 is what it will take, what the individuals will be needing for services to be able to prepare, secure, retain, advance in employment. So those are the 4 criteria that we use to start the eligibility process. If you want to go to the next slide.
Lisa, I have a quick
I'm sorry?
I have a quick question for you. Whose responsibility is it, or is there a way that we would assist in obtaining the information that you would need to show that someone's eligible for services?
So once one of the forms that we have individuals fill out during their intake and their application process is the releases of information. So once that individual signs the release saying that they're allowing us to speak with you guys, we send those forms over to the county board and request those records and send them back over, depending on if it's a student or an adult, which person would be sending those back.
I'm going to add to that, this is really, you can, well, kind of cut off at the bottom there because, again, a lot of words, but our eligibilities are really based off of counselor observation. Thank you. Oh, it's somewhere. Counselor observation, existing documentation from those medical or psych professionals, and any new assessments that we have to have completed. Typically for transition services, we're not doing a lot of assessments because we're getting records in the ETR. A lot of times working with the county board, we're not doing a lot of assessments because we have the Fed form. But a lot of our other populations who come in without support services from other entities, we do have to refer them out a lot of times for medical or psychological evaluations, and that is something that we can do. So it's kind of a combination of all of those things, and they do have to meet all 4 criteria that were on that last slide to be eligible for services with us.
Thank you. So the functional limitations are listed on this slide here. And individuals can have anywhere between 1 and 7 of these different functional limitations: communication, interpersonal, mobility, self-care, self-direction, work skills, and work tolerance. When we're reading through reports and records and things from different entities, we pull out what fits in each of these areas and then document that as evidenced for those different limitations. And then this is put into our eligibility screens. You can go on to the next one, April. So these are our screens in our AWARE program. This first one here is where we document the disabilities. So we break it down into what is the global impairment. Is it cognitive? Is it mobility? Is it ADHD? Psychosocial, neurological, those types of things. And then what the specific impairment is: epilepsy, mild ID, ADHD, ADD, anxiety, those types of things. And we break those down into primary and secondary. So the primary would be which diagnosis does the individual struggle with the most? And then secondary would be the second highest in that area. So they could, like this one has the cognitive is their primary with their seizures, but they also have CP, which would be their secondary diagnosis. So the seizures would be highest, and then the CP would be second. And they could experience any type of limitations from either of those two diagnoses. Okay, next screen, please. So this screen here is showing some different check boxes that we have, talking about where that individual's skills are. Do they have poor communication skills or strong interpersonal skills? Have they held jobs before in the past? Have they lost jobs due to disability in the past? What's their work history look like? And we select these check boxes based off of all the documentation that is coming in from the various sources. Now, the functional capacity narrative is talking about all those 7 different functional limitations. The top of it talks about diagnoses, where they were, where the diagnoses came from, and who diagnosed those individuals with those. And then from there on out, it breaks it down into each section, talking about the different functional limitations. This section can be quite long if it is a pretty involved individual, or it could be fairly short if they don't have a whole lot of functional limitations. It just depends on the individual. These help us know where the individuals are at, so we can help you guys understand as our vendors what this individual will likely need when they begin services with you guys. So next screen, please. Okay, so this screen is talking about eligibility rationale. These are things that the individual will likely need to be successful in employment. And the other side of it is the determination. This is where we determine if the individual is eligible for services or not. So we take those 7 functional limitations, the ones that have a significant amount of limitations in those areas are in these check boxes. And then estimated number of services is how many services we think an individual will need and how long we anticipate those services taking. For transition students, it is very common to have, for months of services, having 60 or 72 months for services to be complete, especially if we get them at a very young age. So at the top there it says most significantly disabled. This was used primarily for our order of selection when we were on the wait list. Now it is the categories that we use for a couple different things. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So most significantly disabled has at least 3 of the functional capacity areas, the functional limitations, when they're looking at employment. This is also required for someone to be considered for supported employment services. Most of the people that that are referred from the board meet this most significantly disabled category. And they usually take a little bit longer to get through services and to get into employment. The other category that we use is significantly disabled. Those are for individuals that have 1 or 2 of the functional limitations, but they'll still need multiple services. And it may not take them quite as long, but it will take a bit of time to get to serve employment successfully. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, next screen, please. So once we have determined the individuals eligible for services, then we will begin our services. So the first thing we do is we create our plan. Now all of our plans are based on labor market information, and we also can use some pre-plan assessments to gain that information. So if an individual isn't sure what they want to do as far as employment, we could do some pre-plan assessments, career exploration, voc evaluations, those types of things to see where their interests and their abilities are at. Excuse me, and then we would use all of that to determine their job goals. The plans contain all of our services, so they would include any assessments that we were doing, work adjustments, job development, coaching, transportation. Anything that we are working with the individual on will be on this plan. And the individuals all have informed choice on who their vendor is. So even if they come in and they are working with the county board for DD services, they could choose to go to a different vendor. It's up to the individual who they would like to work with. That being said, we do discuss with them what the differences are about the different individuals, but ultimately it is their choice who they work with. We also have individual contribution and comparable benefits or requirements for our plans as well. So we want to see that the individuals are contributing something to their plan. Sorry. We want them to be engaged, and individual contribution helps them to show that they are wanting to work as much as we are wanting them to work. And comparable benefit would be anything that they were getting from a different agency or from the schools those types of things. So somebody else that they are working with. And all of these plans should be completed within 90 days from eligibility. So we do have some time frames that the schools are, or I'm sorry, that we have to meet, and these are all in the laws and the regulations that come down from the feds and the state and everybody else. Okay, so next screen, please. So we have a lot of services that we do quite frequently that you're probably familiar with: the summer youth, the pre-employment transition services, coaching, job development, work incentives planning. We also have some other services that we don't do quite as much. We can assist with post-secondary training, driver's training, vocational evaluations if someone is interested in going to college or things like that, rehabilitation technology. So if someone needs a device or something to help alleviate their disability, we can help with those things as well. And orientation and mobility is helping someone to learn how to navigate their environment, whether that be in the office or at their in the factory, wherever. It's just helping them figure out what's around them and how to navigate it safely. Okay. So plan amendments.
Hey, Lisa, there's a question in the chat box.
Okay.
Asking Kathy Hartline would like for you to talk a little bit more about PREETs, if you could.
Okay. So pre-employment transition services is a newer service that we have available. It started last January. These are 5 short services that we offer to students in school. They are time limited, and there is a specific curriculum for each of those areas. So those 5 areas are self-advocacy training, workplace readiness training, career exploration counseling, work-based learning, and counseling on post-secondary options. So it just depends on what the student is interested in. Once a student graduates from high school, though, these services are no longer available to them unless they go directly into a college setting. So Kathy, you probably won't have very many of these,
Right.
as you don't work with the students as much.
I get them in the transition period.
Yeah.
But thank you for explaining that further.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hey, Lisa, I'll add also to that, just since we're giving a little more information on PREETs, that one of the things that's different than any other service that we offer with pre-employment transition services is that someone can actually be referred for those services without being eligible for VR services. So every other service, they have to go through all of these steps that we talked about, but pre-employment transition services is the only service that they can be referred by their school directly with supporting documentation of disability, and they will go to one of our CRCA counselors. So they basically are supporting this, what we call potentially eligible program, and they will then authorize out for those pre-employment transition services without them having to apply for VR, go through eligibility, have a plan in place. So they won't be linked with an OOD counselor, but they'll still receive the services, and then we keep track of the reporting for the outcome of the service, and the reporting goes back to the school district. So that can happen anytime that they're enrolled in secondary education, where a counselor may not be involved, but at the point that we determine that the individual does need VR services beyond pre-employment transition services, they would then be linked with a counselor and we'd go through the steps of determining eligibility because they couldn't receive anything else unless they were eligible for services.
Do you have any awesome vendors in Fairfield County that are providing pre-ed services?
We have a couple. Job Fusion is one of those. All right, so our plans get amended multiple times throughout services typically. We can do plan amendments for substantial changes within the plan. So if we wanted to update an employment outcome, extend dates, add or remove services, those all would be something that we needed to do. We'll need to do a plan amendment for. They're usually pretty quickly completed. They don't take as long as the initial plan does to do the amendment. And we also do annual reviews of our plans. So every year, according to RSA, we are required to review all of the plans for progress. When we do that, we have a conversation with the individual, their family, about how their services are going. The individual has input into the annual reviews, and then there is a letter sent out to the family. We also are now tracking measurable skill gains, which is a new thing we're tracking, where we are making sure that individuals are gaining new skills. And this could be they are passing their courses in school, they're moving on to the next grade level, they're completing their degrees, they're getting new training at work, those types of things. So any skill gains, we've been tracking those as well. Okay, next slide, please. And closure. Once the individual obtains employment and is working independently for 90 days, then we will start talking about case closure. All of our services are time limited, and the individual has to maintain employment for 90 days to be considered a successful closure. Now, some closures are not successful, and there are many different reasons why that could be. If you would go to the next slide, please. So first off, to be successful, we have to meet competitive integrated employment. So most of the employment in Fairfield County is competitive integrated employment. There are a couple like state use contracts and things that individuals could get into which would not meet the competitive integrated employment aspect. Unsuccessful closures. There are several different reasons a case could be unsuccessful. The individual has decided they don't want to work. Maybe they came in to OOD services and they were working at a job and they've decided to stay at that job. That would be an unsuccessful closure if they didn't obtain a new job or move up in their current job. We talked about the measurable skill gains. As long as individuals are making those skill gains, we record those and we can use those for tracking that gain. And then job retention after closure. We are also tracking if an individual is keeping their the second and the fourth quarter after case closure. We have a department that tracks all that for us. And we use that as part of our reporting essay. Okay, next slide. And timeframes. So we do have some timeframes for the entire case. So from application to eligibility, RSA says we have 60 days to get the eligibility to complete it. Our agency's goal, OOD, would like to have that done in 30 days. And last I saw, our average from application to eligibility was like 25 days. So
Our Fairfield and Delaware County team is usually around 24 days.
Okay.
So, but statewide, I think you're right, Elisa, we're around 25, which is,
Bravo.
yeah, pretty impressive because in the last several years, I mean, that number has just dropped drastically. We weren't even meeting 60 days when I started here in 2013. So the fact that our counselors are working really hard to get those completed very quickly is definitely impressive.
And then once we get the eligibility, it's 90 days to get to a plan. Sometimes we can't get the plans done in 90 days if we need to do assessments, things like that. And we can extend that up to 180 days to get an individual into a plan. The other time frame we have is releasing of payments. And this is when you guys would like. Once the reports and the bills are entered into our system, counselors have 7 days to review the report and release the payment. And then the other time frame is closure. So after 90 days of stable employment, that's when we successfully close a case. And stable employment means that the individual is not receiving job coaching on a regular basis any longer. It's just that retention piece of the job coaching. So are there any questions about any of that?
No questions in the chat, Elisa.
All right, I'm gonna have to go, guys. I gotta go get my kiddo.
Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate you, Elisa. And
Oh, you're welcome.
the professional relationship we have with you guys is just unbelievable. We appreciate everything you do for us.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Elisa.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
What time is it, just so I can stay on track, April? I don't have my phone on me. And the
I went
screen is
over.
9 more minutes.
9 more minutes. Okay. Well, we can talk for a couple minutes here about the scorecard. I think you all probably have seen this. We've updated it. It really is a little bit easier to read at this point. These are available statewide for all of our vendors. At this point, the data is about 6 months behind, but really it gives a good screenshot, I guess, of all of the things that as a vendor you're doing based on who you're serving and what types of jobs are you placing them in, what kind of impairment category do they fall under, were they successful, and so this is a good snapshot when you're talking to individuals, if you're within the service coordination piece, about vendors and vendor selection. Obviously our counselors need to be a huge part of that conversation, so I wouldn't want to give the message that it would be okay to do that without them. But this is a piece that can be provided to them for vendors in your area. This is available statewide, but it is just a snapshot. I think part of the difference between our informed choice and free choice is that for informed choice, we talk to individuals about informing them on the experience with certain vendors and kind of these data points that we would use to say, well, this vendor is really good at placing people in this type of higher level job where we haven't necessarily seen success doing that with this vendor. So we can give more detailed information to them when we talk about informed choice to make sure that we're helping guide people toward vendors where we feel like we've had success and that they'll be successful. But ultimately, like Elisa said, it is the individual's decision on who they'd like to work with. But this is a good tool. All of these are available on our website as well.
Amanda, there's a question in the chat about the scorecard. It's from Dorinda. I saw that our work incentives planning and job fusion scorecard have the same scores. Is that because we are scored as one agency, although we provide two different services?
That would be my guess, Dorinda, but I can check on that. I'm not sure, but that would be kind of what I would think is probably happening. But I will I'll look into that and then get an email back to you. Any other questions about the scorecard? Okay, you want to move on there? Okay, just because I think I have a quick minute, I wanted to share with you guys when Elisa was talking about job coaching supports and stable employment. I wanted to mention that sometimes with some of the individuals we're serving, especially in those employment first caseloads who have more significant needs, we're seeing that someone might still need 3 or 4 hours a week of job coaching to be able to be considered stable. So that's all individualized. It's not based on like they can't have any coaching or we're saying that they aren't stable. It's really what is it that they need as a minimum support level to meet their need. Now, the barrier that comes up is that we struggle sometimes with figuring out what does that look like long term. So that's where we come back to the board and say, hey, what is it that this person has available to them for long-term support services? Because we can't stay open forever. We're a short-term support service, but is there the ability to get them the ongoing support that they need so that we still can close them successfully and stable in this job? And those are the conversations that counselors should be having with the County Board of DD staff as we look towards successful closure, so that we don't say, oh, yep, they're stable, we close them out, and now all of a sudden they've lost their job because they don't have what they need. So make sure that those conversations are happening. I trust that my staff are doing that, but if for some reason you're running into struggles with really trying to coordinate what does that look like, then I would definitely reach out to their counselor or to myself. So we did include a contact information slide. I know David Baum and I had a conversation, and a couple of the Job Fusion ladies, we had a conversation last week about some changes within OOD. So you probably see a name on here you're not familiar with, which is Holly Chapman. And so I wanted to take this as an opportunity to share with you guys a little bit of what is going on with our Employment First partnership. So at this time, we are making some changes to our Employment First partnership so that we can basically make sure we're continuing to provide all individuals who are linked with DD. And we are going to be providing statewide coverage a little bit different. So at this time, Fairfield County is actually going to go be reassigned to Holly Chapman, who is one of our Employment First counselors in Franklin County. So she is going to be providing those Employment First services to Franklin and Fairfield. Tanya isn't going anywhere, but she's not going to be the Employment First counselor at this point. We're actually going to have her take on a long-term substitute assignment, I guess, for Brian Reed's caseload, the adult caseload vacancy that we have in Fairfield County. So that transition is expected to take place around October 1st. It doesn't mean that the cases that Tanya has right now are all going to Holly on October 1st. We'll be communicating with the appropriate staff to make sure that you know when that transition is taking place and what it's going to look like. We have to figure out a little bit more about our capacity, especially in Franklin County, before we make that decision. But we wanted to use this as an opportunity to put Holly's information out there. I know David and his team and Tanya and myself and Holly and her supervisor will be meeting next week, I believe, to do some introductions and some changes there. But here are all of the staff that are currently in Fairfield County. Obviously, you guys know Lisa, and she's serving most of the transition youth population that's linked with the County Board of DD in Fairfield County. Ashley Walters is the transition counselor in Canal Winchester schools and Pickerington schools. And then Mela Yoakum has the remainder of the transition students in the other districts in Fairfield County. Like I said, Tanya will be transitioning out of the Employment First counselor caseload and into the adult counselor caseload. And Holly Chapman will be our Employment First counselor in Fairfield County.
Any
and
other,
then me, if you want to contact me, you can.
any other questions for Amanda today? You can unmute yourself instead of typing it in the chat if you'd like. No? All right. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. We really appreciate you being with us today.
No problem. Thank you guys for inviting me. I hope this was a good way to head into your weekend.
Yeah.
Hopefully it gave you some new information that you didn't know about OOD.
Absolutely. Just a reminder to complete your survey at the end of this session. And I wish that you all have a fantastic weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.